Hello, Faith Christian Center, and welcome to our Wednesday edition of a fireside chat. Another gorgeous day. It sure feels like summer out there now. It's finally arrived, and it's about time. So it's a beautiful day, and I just wanted to visit with you today about some things I think that are really, really important for the times we live in. We talked about yesterday how God is working in our lives. He wants to expand us, and I talked about how when He comes into your life, He doesn't just take up residence there. He wants to transform you into the image of Christ. But there's a process we go through that, and that God uses for doing that. And it's not just like we sit in class and God teaches us something, and then we go out and we learn it just as we did in school. But what they'll do, like in the military, when they take you through a basic training course, it's training. It's not teaching, it's training. And the difference between teaching and training is teaching is imparting information where I teach you what I know about a subject. Training is when we change our behavior, our reactions, our responses to situations like that. And in order to grow, when they want to prepare you for in the basic training in the military, they combine the two together. They give you information in a classroom, and then they take you out in the field, and you've got to begin to act on it. Well, God doesn't sit us in a classroom to do this. He puts us into the middle of situations where which give us the opportunity to grow. And one of the major things God has done with us when He created us is He created us in relationship with one another. God made that first man, Adam, and then God said about him, it's not good that he be alone. I don't believe Adam was lonely. I believe Adam was happy by himself, because most men are. And understand that he was not, I don't want to get into all this, he was both male and female. But then God took the female part out of him, and He basically said, now live in relationship with each other, because it's as we live in relationship with one another that we get confronted with our attitudes, with our prejudices, with our pride. And this is why God took male and female and put them together. This is one of God's purposes for marriage, because men and women don't think alike. They don't even see things the same way, and they don't express things the same way. And there are many teachings out there that talk about the differences between men and women. It's sort of an over exaggeration or generalization. But I know in my life, 53 years of marriage next month, then that we have seen the differences that we have. We do not understand things the same way. My wife thinks in very different terms than I do. And I still remember the shock of when I went to God one day and said, God, she doesn't think the way I do. And He said, I didn't make her to. And that jolted me, because I had to realize God's always right. Therefore, was something I needed to learn. What I wanted to get to is this, that God puts people together in relationships that are different. He puts them together in relationships in a marriage, and He wants to put them together in a church, like we have a church. Very different backgrounds, different ages, different economic backgrounds, coming from different nationalities and different races. And God puts us together, and now God says, not just get along, but walk in love with one another. And that's the challenge in marriage. Is now what I have to do is I have to be willing to put aside what I want, what I think. And in Ephesians chapter 5, it really makes this clear to husbands. It says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave Himself for it. I often wonder, what does that mean? Do I have to, physically die? No, that would almost be easier sometimes. Sometimes dying to myself with her means I've got to keep my mouth shut and listen to her when I think I've got a much better answer than she does. I have to be willing to be touched by where she is. I have to be willing to not be right all the time, because God is not as concerned with who is right as He is with who the relationships we're in. And ultimately, God's plan is that the way we not just get along, but the way we as a church love one another, really sincerely care and love about one another, that's how the world's going to know what He's like. Jesus said that to the disciples right before He left. The world's going to know what I'm like by the way you love one another. And I have to say, I think the church has failed terribly at that. And the world's view of what Christ is like is somewhat a reflection of the fact that there's so much jealousy, infighting, jockeying for positions. And that's not what we're called to do. So what we're going to begin to talk about tomorrow is, how do we do this? How do we go from where we are in our relationships, in our marriage, in our relationships with one another in the church, and maybe your relationship with your family and with other people? How do we go about breaking these walls down? How do we go about really learning to love one another. And I'll leave you with this thought of hope, is God has not told us to do that alone, but his Spirit has been placed inside of us to enable us and to help us to do that. In Philippians, it says to work out your own salvation. That's what we're talking about, with fear and trembling. He's not talking about earning your salvation. He's talking about taking the salvation that God has put in us already and working that to the outside so that it begins to have an effect on those around us. And he said, God is at work in us, both to will and to do his good pleasure. So as we go forward in this study together, we're going to find that if we're willing to step into it, the Holy Spirit is in you to enable you and to teach you, to take you by the hand, and it is well worth this journey together. And it's what we're called to do anyway. Well, God bless you. Enjoy the rest of your day, even if you're seeing us tonight. And remember always, this is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. God bless you, and we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow.